Welcome to episode number 2 in my basic training series covering Labyrinth, the War on Terror 2001 to question mark from GMT Games. If you missed the first episode, we covered card play, the makeup of the cards, their anatomy, how they are used in general, the events and how they trigger when you're playing an opponent's event, or how you use the card for the event or the operations points. So if you miss that one, you're probably going to be a little bit confused by this one because you're going to miss out on some of those points. What I am doing today, this episode will cover simply the U.S. operations, how they use their cards to take action. So we're not going to cover event play. Also remember, every time as the U.S. player, you play a jihadist aligned event. So if you end up playing Fatah for the 3 operations points listed here in the upper left-hand corner to do things on the board, you will have to trigger this event. So you got to be aware of that when you're playing these cards. So once again, watch the first episode. You'll get that concept. There won't be a problem. So, in general, the United States, there's a couple of principles that I want to share with you before we go into how to use those operations points. One is what value card you have to use in what situations, and how do you know that? So, the operations value requirement is pretty simple, to be honest. Although, from time to time, I even forget, even though I've played this game 20 plus times. If I am going to, I'm going to show you. I'm going to make this Yemen. This is not the way the game starts out. This is just an example. So if I am trying to do any form of war ideas or different operations here in Yemen, in order to move, so for instance, this example, I'm just going to look at a war of ideas operation, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. I'm going to have to use a 1 or higher value card because the governance is a 1. So in this instance, I could use a 1, 2, or 3 value card to attempt a War of Ideas roll here in Yemen. So that's important to remember. When it is fair, or a 2, and that usually is the trigger, you're going to have to use a 2 or higher value card. So here we go, a 2 or a 3 to do anything in the Gulf states. So if you're going to do a War of Idea roll, or if you're going to move or deploy troops there, or do a disruption, etc. In a poor, they are the most difficult to use. So here is a poor aligned country. I'm sorry, not aligned, poor governance country, Saudi Arabia. The value is a 3. In a poor governance country, you're only going to be able to use a 3 operations value card. So that's the general rule of U.S. operations. Now, that is very different than how the jihadists don't care what the operations value of a card is compared to what the governance is. That determines how many dice they're going to roll when they're doing their operations. So remember, U.S. player, you have to match the value of the territory or country that you are targeting for that operation. And once again, alignment, also a very important principle. Alignment is where they stand in relation to you. Are they an adversary? I'll point that out. An adversary. Are they neutral? Or are they your ally? That will decide how you can do certain things. For instance, you cannot move troops into a non-allied country. So you're going to have to get Pakistan to an allied status or alignment before you potentially can move troops in there to protect. Now, the only way that that's different, and we'll talk about that here in a minute as well, is during a regime change operation, which is it's a subset of the deploy operation. You'll notice Afghanistan currently is an Islamist rule country. It has 4 cells. It is your adversary. The only way you can go in there is by playing a 3 ops value card, deploying troops from one single location, and you must have more troops than they've got cells. So I can't just move 2 troops in there. That's not going to help me do a successful regime change. I'm going to have to deploy troops from the troops track. So you got to keep that in mind. Once again, that's an example where they're an adversary and you can do something in that country. These other countries, if they're your adversary, for instance, look at Syria. Syria is an adversary and is fair. The only way you can really do anything there is to start moving that up through an event play, through other actions, etc. So you got to remember those couple of principles. So from time to time, I do forget those, and you know, it is what it is. When you're playing these games, there's no rules police around to stop you. Just have a good time. All right, so let's really quickly cover the different types of operations, and then we'll go into depth in each one of these. So the first is called War of Ideas. Basically, War of Ideas is a way to improve the alignment, once again, whether they're your ally, adversary, or neutral, or the governance of a Muslim country. The Muslim countries are of 2 types. You've got your crescent symbol here with a dark green background or a white background. Those are, for all intents and purposes, Muslim countries, but they are different. The dark green are Shia mix, and the white are Sunni. That will only refer to certain events, so you got to be aware of that. Here is an example. India is a non-Muslim country. If you use a War of Ideas action in India, you're only going to be able to affect their posture. You can see written here, posture. That is whether they are on your side, they're hard against terrorism, or they're soft or weak against terrorism. So you're going to want to occasionally test those. That's a very expensive operation, but you're going to have to be aware of that, because if you get into the soft or the weak position, you can't do regime changes. You can't bring your troops home. You can't do any of that stuff. So you got to be aware of that. So that's War of Ideas. Deploy, once again, fairly simple. Troops, moving troops to a country, either from another country adjacent or any other place, or off of the troop tracks. Forget that I said adjacent. Doesn't have to always be adjacent. Disrupt, you're going to take out jihadist cells. You can see here there are 4 jihadist cells that are camped out in Afghanistan. The cells have 2 different dispositions. This is inactive, where they have no embossed symbol shown. That means they are hidden. You cannot find them. You can't destroy them. You can't take them out. This is active. We call it covered or uncovered, typically colloquially here at the Player's Aid. But if the symbol is up, that unit can be disrupted and taken out or removed from the board back to the jihadist funding track. So that's an important distinction there. But that's disrupt. You can also remove a cadre marker. Let me show you what a cadre marker is. So here is a look at a cadre marker. Certain events are going to put those out in countries, and that literally means it's easier for the jihadists to recruit there. So you can remove those as well to make it a little more difficult. The U.S. also has kind of a comparable counter or token called the aid marker. You'll see this is an aid +1 War of Ideas. That's going to help you as you try to affect the governance of different countries or the alignment. So that's those markers. You can remove that with a disrupt. An alert, you're trying to get rid of plots. So we talked about this very slightly in the other video. The jihadist player has a certain number of these terror plots that are available. They start with 6. They can ultimately get 6 additional, and these are referred to as weapons of mass destruction, and they come from the Pakistani arsenal. They also come from Russia. They are referred to as weapons of mass destruction, either nuclear, dirty bombs, biological, or chemical weapons. They can get those if there are certain events or they take those areas over. But these plots, the reason that a jihadist player is going to put these out is they can get a certain amount of funding. This one is a 1 plot, or a 1 funding plot. They're only going to get 1 if that plot goes off. Here is a 2, and there's also a 3 that's available. But more importantly, those are going to affect your prestige level as the U.S. if you have troops in that area. It also can affect the posture or governance. So there's a lot of negative effects, and you got to make sure to get those. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The final of those 5 real operations is reassessment. Reassessment is a very difficult one. You don't want to do it unless it's absolutely necessary. Reassessment has to do with your relation to global war on terror relations. I'm going to move the camera over here to the left so you can see these 2 tables or tracks. This is the GWOT relations track. You'll notice it says soft here on the left. It says hard on the right. This game starts where the world is at 1 and the U.S. is on its hard side, but at 0. So as long as you are in alignment with the world, you're not going to get negatives when doing certain actions. But if you are not in alignment, such as you're soft and the world is hard, there can be negative penalties, -1, -2, -3, to your war of idea rolls to affect governance and stability, and you got to pay attention to that. So the reason I bring that up is that reassessment operation. You're going to attempt to affect one of these Schengen countries, making them come back to your side, whether you're soft or you're hard, and you're going to do a test. We'll talk about that. It's fairly difficult. And is hard to accomplish. It also takes 2 3-value cards, which really is costly. The other track here that I want you to pay attention to is your U.S. prestige track. You have a low, medium, high, and very high. This will affect directly your war of idea rolls when you're trying to change governance or stability. You'll notice the player here starts at an 8, which puts them, the U.S. player starts at an 8, which puts them directly in the +1 War of Ideas bonus. If you get up to 10 or higher, you can get a +2 War of Ideas bonus, and that's really something you want to do. And the way you're going to increase that is through events. Event cards will increase that. You also, if you have troops located in an area where you're doing 2 troops in an area where you're doing disruption operations and remove troops, you're going to get an increase there. You also get a prestige increase when you do a reassessment. Remember, the reassessment is the Schengen countries who are non-Muslim, trying to set their posture as soft or hard. If you set it to hard and you are hard, you're going to get a +1 prestige increase. They're behind you because you believe you're fighting the same war in the same manner that they are. So that's a very quick lesson on those 2 tracks. I would say when I finally do my kind of quick strategy video, these 2 tracks can be ultimately important to what the U.S. Player is trying to do, and conversely should be a focus of the jihadist player, because if you can get this number down, you can make war of idea rolls almost nigh impossible. Also, if you flip the U.S. from hard to soft when the world is hard, my gosh, that can be really punishing. And it is very possible that a war of ideas roll is impossible to do if you have -3 and you have to roll a 5 or higher. You can't make it because you might have too many negatives. So very key, very important, something that the U.S. player and the jihadist player must pay attention to in strategy. So let's go back to a look at the operations. We're 15 minutes in. We're going to go ahead and start, and I've got my rule book in hand because there's always little bitty exceptions. I think that's the thing I also need to make sure you understand is there are little bitty exceptions and bonuses that you need to be familiar with in order to play this game and play it well. So once again, we've talked about those things. Let's go ahead and jump into a U.S. War of Ideas operation. And I'm just going to go ahead and show you an example. So the player aids in this game, absolutely fantastic. So you'll notice here on this area is the War of Ideas table. Has beautiful references to the sections in the rule book that explicitly describe this. Here's the table that you have to do. You're going to have to roll, in order to be successful, a modified 5 or 6 or higher on a 6-sided die. That can be challenging, right? That's only 1 out of 3 chance to succeed. But as you can see here, there are die roll modifiers. There are a bunch of negatives. If your prestige is negative, remember I talked about that. If your GWAT relations has a penalty, if you're attempting a shift from fair to good, that's going to incur a -1. It's just much more difficult. You're really establishing that government, funding them, helping them get organized and set. It's a challenge. You're also going to get bonuses. Remember that aid marker I showed you? You can only ever put 1 aid marker via a missed roll, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can have multiple aid markers if an event card adds 1, and those can be really big boons to you in helping you do that. You can also gain bonuses from doing a War of Ideas roll in a country that is adjacent to one of your own good allies. You can only do a +1 maximum, so that's something you need to keep in mind. So let me give you an example of that. The Gulf states here is an ally, but they are fair. If they were good, let me flip that over. Anytime you did a War of Ideas roll in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Pakistan, those are adjacent, you're going to get that +1 bonus. So one of the strategies, and we'll talk about this when I put my strategy side video together, is to try to group these good countries kind of in that center so you touch a lot of these areas and are able to really begin to spread out. Because ultimately you're going to win as the U.S. player by accumulating, depending on the scenario, whether you're doing the campaign or just the scenario, either 6, 12, or 15 fair to good countries, you're going to get a U.S. win. So that's something you got to pay attention to. So let's jump back into War of Ideas. So War of Ideas have to be done in a Muslim country. Remember, these are both Muslims, the dark green and the white background, Shia mix and Sunni countries. You can do a War of Ideas roll there, and it's for changing the stability, changing their alignment or their stability. Now, you can also do it in a non-Muslim country, but for there, it's doing a test of whether they are hard or soft. So you got to keep that in mind. So first, we're going to look at trying to make an attempt to improve either stability or governance. So at this point, alignment or governance. Gosh, see, sometimes these terms get a little confused. So let's go ahead and we're going to look at Gulf states. And okay, one other concept. Remember, the U.S. player and the jihadist player gets 2 cards back to back. Then it flips over to the U.S. player, and the U.S. player gets 2 cards back to back. So you got to keep that in mind. Some of these actions you're going to do are going to require multiple actions for you to be successful, and you have to be aware of that. So let's go ahead and try to change the stability or governance, of this country, Gulf states, from a 2 to a 1. So we're going to go to the player aid. So first, I have to play, remember, it's a fair country, a 2 or higher value card. So here I have Ethiopia Strikes, and I'm using it for the operations points. I'm not using it for the event. This is a U.S. aligned event, see U.S. This is not going to affect me. I can choose to play this for the event, and sometimes you're going to do that, but I'm doing it for the operations points. So I'm playing a 2 operation value card to attempt a War of Ideas roll here in Gulf States. So going to the player aid, remember, I need a modified 5 or 6 or higher to succeed. So we're going to look at the die roll modifiers. I don't have any negatives because GWAT relations are in alignment. I'm not attempting a shift to good. That's the very top one. I do, however, gain a +1 War of Ideas roll because my US prestige is at 8, which is in the +1 War of Ideas roll area. So I'm going to gain a +1. Don't have an adjacent good ally, also do not have an aid marker. So my roll, and you got this really cool tan 6-sider, my roll is going to be a D6 +1 trying to get a modified 5, 6 or higher. If I miss by 1 pip, meaning in this instance a 4, I'm going to place an aid marker there that will help me on my next War of Ideas roll. So let's go ahead and try it. All right, so I succeeded. I rolled a 4. +1 from my, US prestige gives me a 5 result. Wait, I actually get a -1 because I'm trying to go to good. I did get a -1. So in this instance, I'm going to fail. Do you guys follow me on that? I think I messed up a little bit. I apologize. Remember, when you're trying to go to good, you're going to get a -1. I also had a -1 US prestige, so that cancels it out. I end up rolling a 4. So when a 4 is rolled, remember I get to put out an aid marker. So I'm going to go ahead and put out an aid marker, and that stays there until it's either removed by an event, a jihadist operation, or you succeed at doing what it is that you are doing. So that was my first card play. I'm going to move that out. So now, hey, I'm going to follow that up because I really want to get that going so I can start making some progress here. So I'm going to play a number. I have a jihadist 2 value card. Remember, you're going to have to play this event. If Pakistan has a cell, block. All right, so Pakistan currently doesn't have a cell. Great time to play this event card. So I'm going to play that too. I'm attempting to go to good, so I'm -1. +1 for my War of Ideas, and +1 from US Prestige, being 7+. So I'm a net +1. So let's roll. All right, so I rolled a 4 this time. With my net +1, I succeed. So I get to flip that fair marker to good. The governance is now good. It's an ally. I remove that aid marker. It doesn't help me any longer. And I have been successful on that turn. I did what I set out to do. So let me show you another example. Let's go ahead and go to Pakistan. So Pakistan, the important thing is before I can make that good, the governance level good, I really have to get that to ally. So I'm going to go ahead and try to get, I'm going to go ahead and try to make Saudi Arabia, I'm going to improve their governance level from a 3. I'm going to try from a 3 to a 2. So as a 3 value card, I have to play a 3 or higher value card. So boom, I'm going to play back channel. It's a US aligned event. Don't have to worry about that. I throw that down. Looking at this, once again, I have a +1 War of Ideas roll. No other negatives because I'm not trying to go to good, nor do I have GWAT relations penalties. I also have an adjacent good ally. So I'm going to be +2 on this roll here in Saudi Arabia. So let's go ahead and roll at +2. Wow, I'm doing really well. I rolled a 5. So I'm going to succeed there. I change it from a poor to a fair ally. And that's an example of that. I wanted to show you that because it's very important to start getting a cluster of 1 value allies here so that you can benefit directly from these, trying to get those roles accomplished. So that's the War of Ideas action or operation in a Muslim country. Let's go ahead and try to do a non-Muslim country. Let me just use it here. So once again, in order to do that, if I want to do what is called, actually that's called a reassessment. I shouldn't be doing that yet. Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and do a regime change. I'm going to show you because that's a subset of the War of Ideas concept. All right, so a regime change. War of Ideas may occur in a country marked with a regime change. Well, I'm not doing that. I'm actually going to, that's a deploy, so I'm getting confused again. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead, guys. So we've looked at War of Ideas in a Muslim country. We'll talk about regime change once we get there. We talked about aid markers. War of Ideas in non-Muslim countries, that's where you're going to shift the posture. And that can be challenging. I'm going to go ahead and just show you that, how that works. So here is the player aid. When you do a War of Ideas action in a Muslim country, you're going to use this table. But when you do it in a non-Muslim country, like I'm going to do here in India, you're going to go ahead and use this posture table. The only adjustments you're going to get to this roll is if you have GWAT penalties. So it's pretty much a straight up roll. And you can see if I roll a 1 to 4, it's going to be a soft. A 5 to 6 is going to be a hard. So I'm going to go ahead and roll a die. Okay, I rolled a 4, so they're going to be soft, which isn't great because that now potentially could reduce my global relations, but it doesn't in this instance, but now they are soft. Now, I can do that again later to try and test that, but it's going to take a lot of cards. So we don't want to do that very often, and it can be a great challenge to actually get that accomplished. So let's go ahead and move on to the deploy action. So we'll first look at a deploy action, just moving some troops around. So deploy operation allows the U.S. player to move any number of troops from one location to another. They don't have to be adjacent. Troops cannot deploy from a regime change area. So let's assume I had two troops in this area and I had what's called a regime change, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. I can't leave those troops from there because we're trying to support the government in Afghanistan to kicking out the jihadists and getting back to being on the side of right? So we can't move troops out of a regime change, but we can do what is called a regime change. So you can see it's Islamist rule. So a regime change is really a special type of deploy. You have to be at hard posture. Currently, the U.S. is at hard posture. And the player then has to play a 3-value card. So I'm gonna pick this 3-value card that I have that I've already used before. Remember, that event could or could not go into effect. I play a 3-value card, and I have to move at least 6 troops into the country. The country has to be Islamist rule, which once again Afghanistan currently is. You can also use what is called reserves. We have not talked about reserves much. I think I did in the last video. You can always take a card. Let's just take this example of a 1-value card. I didn't have anything that I really wanted to do with it that turn. I can discard it and play the op into my reserves. So what that does is it allows me to add that 1 value to, say, a 1 or a 2 operation value card to make it a 2 or a 3. So that's important sometimes because you may have a really terrible hand of cards. If you don't have a lot of 3s, you're not going to be able to do regime changes. You're not going to be able to affect poor governance countries, etc. So you may have to rely on your reserves. So we're going to first deploy 6 troops. We're going to go up to the troop track. 6 troops come in. And now my troop level has moved to at war. I'm now going to draw 1 less card. That's also something we'll talk about a lot in the strategy video. We're now going to place this green regime change marker. here on the top. So that means that we're there. I'm going to roll the governance on the country test table. I'm going to show you this player aid. Up at the very top, country tables, initial test. You find the governance or posture of an unmarked country. This is an unmarked country, right? You're going in and doing a regime change. You do that by roll governance. If non-Muslim, roll posture. So we're going to go down to the governance table and we're going to roll. So you take a six-sider and you simply roll it to determine. So I rolled a 2. That country is going to be poor, which I can flip that over. They are a poor adversary at this point, and I've got a lot of work to do to get that moving up. We rolled the governance. You're going to shift the alignment to ally. So we're going to go ahead and move that alignment all the way to ally. So that saved me a lot of steps in the interim to get that up to where I can really make a point. We're going to shift all the cells that are there to active. So we're literally going to uncover all of these jihadist cells that are sitting there. We're rooting them out with our troops. The local government is now cooperating with us. We're targeting those jihadists, and we're going to uncover their plots and operations. Then we're going to actually end up rolling what is called prestige. So this is an interesting step. So I'm going to find that table. So on the player aid, and these player aids are really, really good. So you're going to randomly drop or raise the U.S. prestige. You're actually going to do 2 dice roll. You do it after a regime change, when you do a withdraw, if an unblocked plot is in the United States, or if an event tells you to do this. First, you're going to roll a die, modify by -1 if GWOT relations penalty is more than 0. That's not the case for us at this time. And I'm going to roll a die. 1 to 4, it's going to drop. And then we roll 2 dice to determine how much it drops. 5 to 6, it's going to raise. All right, so we rolled a 1. Our prestige is then going to drop. 1 to 4, it's going to drop. Then we roll 2 dice, shift the prestige by the lower die amount. So this is not good. All right, good. We only took a 1 prestige hit. We rolled a 1 and a 6, but it's by the lower die. So we move our prestige from 8 to 7, and we still have that +1 War of Ideas benefit. So that's a regime change. Now, what's going to happen is you can't move those troops until this country becomes a governance of good. So you're there over the next 3-4 turns trying to fight to get that. You also might try to uncover these cells that you've already uncovered because of the action to get rid of them. That's what that is. You're going to have to do that because the jihadist player will win if they have a certain amount of those poor Islamist countries. They're going to win at a certain level, depending on what the scenario is. All right, so we talked about regime change as a part of deploy. We also talked about moving, which is pretty simple. If I want to deploy troops into a certain area, a deploy operation simply allows you to move from a location to another. The governance of the destination country determines the minimum operations value, like we've always talked. So let's say I'm going to throw a couple cells on there, just as an example. All right, so I'm going to throw those couple cells on there. And remember that the country at the moment that you try to deploy in there must be an ally, and it must be a Muslim country. So it has to be an ally for me to ultimately move in there, and that's something you're going to have to work on, trying to get them towards ally, which you can do. You just have to do a War of Ideas roll, and hopefully that's going to help. But I have to play at least a 2 or a 3 card. So I'm going to go ahead and play this 2 card, which is neutrally aligned. And I'm going to move from one location Actually, I'm going to leave those troops there. I'm going to move them across, they're airlifted over there. That way I can protect the Pakistani arsenal because I've moved troops in there now. I can also start working on disrupting and getting rid of those cells, which is important. So that's a deploy. Fairly simple. All right. Also withdraw, I'm not going to necessarily cover, but withdraw, very similar process. You have to regime change. You have to play a 3-value card. You deploy any number of troops out of a regime change country, and you move them back to the troops track. You're going to take any aid markers. You're going to place a besieged regime there, which is on the back of the aid markers. You're going to place that there, and these are going to go back to the track. You're weak, you're getting out of it, and you're leaving that country to really fend for itself. You're then going to have to do one of those prestige rolls, which can ultimately affect you positively or negatively, depending on your roll. All right, so those are deploy. So we've talked about war of ideas, we've talked about deploy. Let's go ahead and talk about disrupt. I think this is a prime example here of some disrupt actions that are going to result. So remember, you have 2 cards that you can play in a row. You got 2 cells that are uncovered. You have 2 troops here. That's a prime example for you to go ahead and make an impact there in Pakistan and get rid of some of those cells. So disrupt operations allow you to remove active cells, make sleeper cells active. Sleeper, remember, are with the embossed symbol down. Or you can remove that cadre marker that I showed you earlier that allows auto or easier recruiting. A disrupt operation requires a target country has at least a cell or a cadre, and it's an ally, has 2 troops in it, or is non-Muslim and is not Iran. So interesting. There's some limitations. You got to be careful of not messing those up. Also, if I remove the last cell in a country, I'm actually going to have to place a cadre marker there because you don't fully root them out. You're just kind of basically hurting their actions. All right, 2 troops. When my posture is hard, I can affect 2 cells selected by me. So I have 2 troops. The U.S. is hard. There's 2 cells there. I can do a disrupt action to make those cells active. Doesn't require a roll. You just do it. So once again, I'm going to play this 2-value card. I have 2 troops. So this might be my first card of my 2 cards in a turn because you wouldn't want to necessarily make them active and then leave them there. If you're going to make them active, you want to take them out. That's what you want to do. So I would play that. I would do a disrupt action, and I would make both of those cells active. So in essence, think about that. You've got some intel. You've done some house-to-house searching. You've found some infrastructure and some leads, and now it's led you onto the doorstep of these hidden cells. All right. Oh, so the other thing I forgot, sorry, because I did 2 troops and I affected at least 2 cells, not even has to be removing, my prestige is going to go up 1. So I'm going to go up to an 8. So I've played that one. I'm going to go ahead, I have a 3 card left here. I don't want to do that, but I would play a 3 card to then do a second disrupt action as part of my turn. And then I'm going to remove both of those cells. They will go back to the track. And because I 2 troops, remove 2 cells, I get another +1 prestige. So you can see that's a way for the U.S. to kind of gain favor amongst the other countries. Also to get rid of troubled cells, because you get 3 or 4 cells in there, and the jihadist player can do, in Pakistan, can do a jihad, either a minor or a major. They can ultimately end up getting some of these weapons of mass destruction. We'll talk about that next time. Those get added to their plots that are available, and they can really start putting the heat on you. So you want to get rid of those. Also, Disruption is a way to get rid of these cells so that you can not be afraid of them doing another major jihad and taking it back. So that's how disruption works. So alert. Let's go ahead and talk about alert. I'm going to have to bring out my 3-value card. So let's say I'm going to put a couple of cells in a territory. I'm going to put them back in Pakistan. All right, so during the jihadist turn, they ended up doing what is called a terror plot. They uncovered some guys, they made their rolls, they successfully placed some terror or a plot there. And now the U.S. can do what's called an alert. So an alert operation always requires a 3-value card. So once again, got a Patriot Act I'm going to throw there. That's a very valuable card and kind of difficult to use in this way. But if it's something important, then you got to do that. An alert operation allows the U.S. to reveal and block one plot marker from any country. Doesn't necessarily have to mean you have troops there, but you can go ahead and alert on those. The U.S. may inspect the plot marker only after selecting it. So there may be 2 there and you can only pick 1. If it's removed from the game, it goes back face down in the available plots section of the board up there. You can see where I took that from. No roll required. You just have to meet the requirements of the card. So luckily I had a 3. I went ahead and removed a plot. I look at it. Oh, it was a 2-value plot. That would have been a bad one. And I throw that back in there and I've foiled their attempt. So that operation is very valuable, but you really have to play it in the current game state. You know, if it's not going to affect you negatively, it's really hard to play a 3-value card just to stop the jihadists from getting 1 or 2 funding. If it's going to affect you negatively, like drop governance or affect your prestige, you may want to invest that 3-value card, and that will be something we'll talk about in the strategy part of our videos. You just shouldn't willy-nilly be throwing away a card that has such great utility from an event, but also a 3-value card's a lot more versatile because you can do that use that on any space. So the final operation that we talked about, but I'm not sure we're going to go through an example because I feel like it's pretty simple. So a reassessment operation is that one that we haven't talked about, but allows the U.S. side to change posture from hard to soft or soft to hard. So once again, remember at the very beginning of the game, there's this GWAT marker. It has a hard side and it has a soft side. So depending on, let's move back over here just so you can get that. You know, if the world is soft and you're trying to, you know, you're hard and you're up here, you're trying to do things, you're going to be gaining a lot of negatives. It's going to be very challenging for you to do what it is that you need to do. So a reassessment is a way to help you with that. It requires 2 3-op value cards, so it's extremely expensive. So there's 2 3-op cards that I have to play. And the other key thing is, remember, if I play events of my enemy, they go off. I get to choose when these go off. Is my hard soft changing, reassessing first, or are the events going off? And that's something, you know, as a part of strategy in any card driven game, I'm trying to make a card unplayable for my enemy. So I may want certain things to happen first so that that event does not, you know, go off. So if I want to get to soft, there's only been a couple of instances where I felt like going soft was a good thing. I have to play those 3 cards. That takes up my entire turn, and you just switch that posture. Once again, not something you want to do often, but it is an option because now when I do War of Ideas rolls, I'm not going to gain those, here I would have been gaining a -2. And let's assume my prestige was a little lower. -2 makes it so I have to roll really a 6 or higher, even just to get an aid marker with a 4. And then, I don't know, it just, to me, this is a very difficult choice to make in the game. One that you may have to make, one that you really should not make willy-nilly. So those really are the 5 different operations that the U.S. can use their operations points for. They're very important. They're something that you have to understand implicitly so that you know what you should and should not be doing or when to do certain things. I think I made this comment at the beginning of the game. Here, let's go back and look at that list right here. It's options. Really, it's interesting because they're listed, I think, almost in the way that you should be doing them most often. War of Ideas is your bread and butter as the U.S. player. You're going to have to be doing that regularly to get, alignment and governance on your side for territories. That's the way you're going to win. Then comes deploying troops from the troop track into regime change countries, moving them from territories to other territories, or ultimately withdrawing them when necessary and when needed. Because another thing we didn't talk about, but we'll talk about in strategy, is on that troop track, each box that I move down, I'm going to lose a card. So you start the game at 9 cards. You're then going to go down to 8 cards when you're at war. When you're in overstretch, you're only getting 7 cards. And your jihadist opponent may be getting 8 or 9 cards. And man, that can be deadly. If they have 1 or 2 uncontested plays of cards, you can be cutting your own throat and helping them win the game without much effort. Also disrupt there. That's one you're going to do very often. You got to get rid of these cells. And remember, these cells are going to pop up like fires all over the board. He's going to start, he or she, whoever you're playing, they're going to start moving cells over to these Schengen countries, unless you have certain events out that stop that. Why that's important, they're trying to get closer to the United States. If they ever get a cell in the United States and they take one of these weapons of mass destruction plots and put it there, unless you can alert on that, you're screwed. Now, imagine they have 2 of those and they put 2 weapons of mass destruction in the United States. You're going to have a lot of 3 value cards or a lot of reserves, or you're going to end up losing the game. So that's something. I got to move that over. I didn't realize that it just was off the board. But that's something you got to worry about. You got to think about it. That's why alert is important. And I often say it, and I'll talk about this in my strategy video at the end. Man, when those nukes are out in the open and they're available to the jihadist player, you have to start playing a little bit differently. You really have to manage your hand of cards a lot more skillfully. You have to play more reserves so that you can potentially alert on terror plots that have been placed in the United States, because, man, you don't want to lose the game. And I've lost the game to Alexander one time like that in our 15 to 20 plays, and, man, it did not feel good. I'm going to be honest. The one you're probably going to use the least, and probably the one that I recommend using the least, is that reassessment concept. But there you go. I know that's a 48-minute video. I really intended this to be a 30 or 40-minute video. I hope you got the concepts down. I hope I didn't make too many glaring errors. You got to remember, these kind of games, they're complex, they're involved. There's a lot of different steps, and you really have to know what you're doing, have the rule book and the player aids right next to you. And your first couple of plays of this type of game is going to be very challenging. There's no doubt about that. But I will say, this game rewards you based on the amount of work that you put in it. Alexander and I have played this so much that we love it. We still today will drop everything we're doing and we would play Labyrinth along with any one of its expansions, whether it's the Awakening or the Forever War or not. We feel like the game is that good and that well done that we really enjoy it. Can be a long game, can be a very tiring game, can be a game that is very, very frustrating. but it is very rewarding for those that put the time into it, understand the concepts, understand how to do what they want to do, and also understand what their opponent is trying to do. So thanks for watching. This has been episode 2 in our basic training series. If you missed episode 1 on card play, you can still catch that on our YouTube channel. It is almost an hour long. I apologize for that. But the next video in the series that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at jihadist operations, which, remember, are very, very different. They require dice rolls more often, and the card operation value determines how many dice they're going to get to roll. So their odds of success increase. So keep that in mind. Thanks for watching. I've been Grant for the Player's Aid.